Welcome to Literary and Jury Charge Practice. Let's start with this closing argument. Ready? Here we go. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you before we start for being here and for doing this service. My client wishes to thank you for being here and doing this service. It's not an easy thing to be a juror. You have to give up some of your time. You have to put aside your life for a little bit. But we found over a few hundred years that this is the best way to do things. We have learned most in a sad experience over those same hundreds of years that the best way to settle disputes between the citizens of our country or between the government and the citizen is to have 12 citizens sit and listen to the evidence and make the decision, which of course requires that we bring people like yourselves in here. I used to tell my kids there's 3 ways you can always serve your country. You can vote, you can pick up your rifle and head to the front lines, or you can be a juror, because our country doesn't run if you don't have jurors, if you don't have people that are willing to do the work of the jury. So thank you. You know, it wasn't always this way. We have not always done things the way we do them now. And sometimes I like to remind all of us of the way it used to be. We have kind of what is called the English system evolved. It arose in England a few hundred years ago. We adopted it, but it has evolved. Back in the day, Prince John would go out and grab one of Robin Hood's merry men that would be out in the forest, and they bring him to the castle, Sheriff of Nottingham, whoever, and the trial would be a brief affair, usually conducted in the dungeon with several sharp or hot instruments, and someone would be found guilty or not. And as time went by, we realized, that is really not the best way to do things, certainly not the fairest. You have the government that is actually being judge, jury, and execution. So we took the decision-making process out of the hands of the government and put it into the hands of you folks. We added windows. We are not in the dungeon anymore. We are upstairs. The light can come in. The people, the citizens of our country, can come in and watch the process. It's recorded. There's a record of what happens. We now have an impartial magistrate, and one of the last things that they added was me. They decided that it was a good thing for a person to be represented by someone that knows something about the law that can help that person. And one of the main ways that they can help is by asking the questions. Wait a minute, not so fast. What did you say about this? What did you say about that? How does this fit together? Your conclusion doesn't seem to be justified. Those kind of things are what I can do. Then it's submitted to you and you can make your decision. So my client has someone to speak for him, and that's me. And what I would like to speak to you today are 2 things, the evidence and the law. And I believe that you will find that when you look at all the evidence, you will see that contrary to what the government has said, this is really a very weak circumstantial evidence case. It's very weak circumstantial evidence, and that's probably why it wasn't filed for 3 years. What we do know from hearing the witnesses in this case is that somebody died in July of 2012. In March 2015, someone down at the Sheriff's Crime Lab is looking at GSR evidence, trying to find something to go with the strong circumstantial evidence. What did they find? One piece of GSR on someone's sleeve, one piece on their pants from a crime scene that would suggest there was much, much, much more. And here we are, based upon that weak circumstantial evidence and some crime scene evidence that was actually looked into 3 years later. All right, let's get to some literary practice. Let's see what we have. This is called Will the Book Disappear? Ready? Here we go. Digital technology influences just about every aspect of society, including the world of books. Bob Dylan's mantra, "The times they are a-changin'," applies here as well. Books won't go away anytime soon, but there's a mighty transformation underway. For the first time ever, sales revenue from ebooks surpassed hardcover books in the first quarter of 2012, according to the Association of American Publishers. Paperback books, however, still represent the book revenue leader, although by a shrinking margin. It appears that ebooks will also surpass paperbacks in sales over the next several years. The declining prices of such specialized ebook readers as Amazon's Kindle and Barnes & Noble's Nook, as well as the ability of tablet computers such as Apple's iPad and other portable devices to handle ebooks, are key reasons for the rise in ebook sales. The benefits of ebooks and ebook readers or e-readers are palpable. An e-reader weighs the same whether it stores 1,000 books or one book. This is a major convenience while commuting, traveling on business, or vacationing. Ebooks are searchable, which can be especially beneficial when doing research with nonfiction. You can obtain ebooks immediately over the internet without having to go to a bookstore or wait for the book to arrive in the mail. Unlike printed books, ebooks don't require trees for paper and petroleum for ink. Paradigm shifts never happen without some drawbacks, and ebooks are no exception. Unlike with an e-reader, if you drop a book on the sidewalk, you typically won't risk ruining it. Same with forgetting it in your car on a hot summer day. You won't have a problem reading a printed book on an airplane during takeoff and landing. It can be difficult, if not impossible, to loan an ebook to a friend or sell it in the used book market when you're done with it. All right, we'll get back to that. Let's try some more of this closing argument. Ready? Here we go. Now, there was one constant in all of this, and that was Mr. Georgina Richardson. Georgina Richardson is the one that says, "Hey, why don't you guys search the chicken coop?" I mean, the cops came out, they took photos, they knew somebody was shot, body gets taken away, some photos are taken, but Georgina has to come up and say, hey, come back, complete this investigation, do the chicken coop too. So they did the chicken coop, and then, as she testified, for the next 3 years, she sent dozens and dozens of emails and texts to the detective, to the government agency. And finally, they said, okay, let's look at the GSR. Let's see if there is anything there. They look at the GSR, and what did they find? One particle. Okay, let's file the charge. That's what this case is about. Let me go over some of the law with you, please. The judge is going to read you the law after Mr. Foy and I finish. The fact that a criminal charge has been filed against my client is not evidence. We talked about that in voir dire, as the judge has already instructed you. But that's a very important part of our way of doing things. By the way, our rules have evolved with the court system. I use this as an example. When I was a boy, I grew up in Kansas City. Kansas City had a baseball team in those days. You are all familiar with the Kansas baseball team, right? The Athletics. That was my team, the Kansas Athletics. I go down there to games and watch at the old municipal stadium. The old municipal stadium had a sign in left field and right field that says 346 feet. That is what it took to get a home run in that field. Now, there was a guy that owned the Yankees, and he put his right field fence at 280 feet. And the guys are like, man, we're just teed off at the short right field fence. So the guy that had the Kansas field moved his field to 280 feet. Baseball says you cannot do that. We didn't say it was okay. You've got to move it back. So he lowered the pitcher's mound. So he raised the pitcher's mound. Baseball says, you know what? We got a rule for every single one of these things. We want the game to be interesting. We want people to come and see it. People are not going to come if every game is 1-0. Nobody is going to come if every game is 25-3. So over the years, they will take a baseball. Have you ever cut a baseball open when you were a kid? We usually just knocked the cover off of them, then we saw what was inside. But if you want to cut that ball open, there's a little cord in there, and it's wound with, I don't know if that is string or yarn or whatever, and then it's covered with horsehide. Now the baseball with the stringing, depending on how tightly it's wound, the tighter you wind it, it jumps off the bat a little faster. A little looser, doesn't go as far. Lower the pitcher's mound a little bit, and the hitters have an advantage. Raise the pitcher's mound a little bit, and the pitchers have an advantage. So they adjust those things, they tweak it, and that's what we've done with our system too. We've tweaked it, so it is as fair as we could possibly make it. Of course, we can tweak it and try to make it fair, but if you don't follow the rules, it's not fair anymore, but we assume you all do that. And one of the tweaks is that we all recognize that him being arrested is not evidence of anything. It's not evidence that he did anything. He's presumed to be innocent, and that presumption lasts until if the government proves it beyond a reasonable doubt, and the evidence shows in this case they have not done that. Unless the evidence proves a defendant guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, he's entitled, as everyone else is, to an acquittal. You must find him not guilty. Now, this instruction is a very important instruction in this case because this is a circumstantial evidence case. I'll remind you again, circumstantial evidence, if you look out the window and you see the water coming down from the sky, that's direct evidence that it's raining. If your friend comes into your house and he's wearing a raincoat and it's wet, that's circumstantial evidence that it's raining. But circumstantial evidence has one more condition. The judge will tell you that direct evidence and circumstantial evidence are both good evidence. They both can sustain a conviction, but there's a caveat. There's a warning with circumstantial evidence. You see, I know you've read about logic, if this and this kind of stuff. In circumstantial evidence, you'll have a fact. The fact could be, my client is filing for a divorce, and you draw conclusions, or you see if that fact is based upon credible evidence. Well, there's a filing in the county. Yeah, that's probably credible evidence. So that's the first step you have to do when dealing with circumstantial evidence, is find out, is the logic behind the circumstantial evidence conclusion type. But the second one is the one that causes problems. This is what the judge will read to you. Before you can rely on circumstantial evidence to find the defendant guilty, you must be convinced that the only reasonable conclusion supported by the circumstantial evidence is guilt. It has to be the only conclusion. Back to some literary practice. This is called 7 Tips for Court Reporters. Ready? Here we go. Before I entered the court reporting industry, I was a practicing attorney. My experience with court reporters was mixed. Some were outstanding and others would show up late, frazzled, unprepared for the proceeding, or worse. For an attorney, the relationship with the court reporter and agency should be seamless. Attorneys expect their court reporters to be punctual, presentable, professional, and polished. If the reporter fails to meet any of these standards, it is highly unlikely the agency, let alone the court reporter, will be requested again. Attorneys and firms typically request the same reporter and agency because attorneys like consistency. By following these 7 steps, you will not only be doing your part in upholding professionalism for the industry, but you will ensure repeat business. This is not an exhaustive list, but if you follow these simple tips, it will make your job easier and the attorneys will appreciate you and request you again for future depositions. Tardiness, no-shows. Nothing will frustrate a room full of attorneys more than being late or failing to appear for a deposition. Make sure you know where you are going and how you are going to get there, and manage your schedule if you are unable to make it or you anticipate you will be late. Notify your agency immediately. Take charge. You are the neutral party in the room, and you can remind everyone in that room that your job is to accurately preserve a word-for-word transcript. Therefore, everyone in the room needs to listen to your instructions. If an attorney or witness is talking over someone, say something. If an attorney is being rude or unprofessional, say something. If an attorney is speaking too fast or is reading from a piece of paper, it is perfectly acceptable to remind the speaker to slow down. If an attorney is going through exhibits, make sure you mark them and tell the attorney to slow down to allow yourself time to properly label each exhibit so you are not labeling as the witness or attorney is speaking. But please, this is not a license to complain. Rather, it is an opportunity for you to take charge of the deposition from the beginning. All right, we will get back to some more tips for court reporters, but for now, that will conclude our literary and jury charge practice.